Hi, welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Justin Krohn, the editor of WeCrashed, Apple TV Plus limited series, which just finished its season last week, starring Jared Leto and Anne Hathaway, about WeWork, the workspace that was co-founded by Adam Neumann. Justin, I'm a big fan of the show. I loved it so much. You worked as an editor on the first and the second episodes, both directed by John Requa and Glenn Ficarra. They established the tone of the show so well. And I guess I wanted to hear first, like, what your initial conversations with them and obviously the showrunners as well about like the show and how like the tone and the pacing of it and how you kind of established that in those first two episodes.
Yeah, that was like probably the biggest conversation about the show. And when I initially met with them, I remember reading the script and I thought because I just read the first script when I initially met them, and I was like, oh, I thought it was really funny, and it kind of had a very Wolf of Wall Street. It had a lot of energy to it. Had a thing, and when I met them, we kind of talked about that, and they also talked about Sid and Nancy because there's kind of this very very toxic love relationship between Adam and Rebecca. And one of the things once we got into editing, once we got working, was how comic would the show be, because there certainly was a version of this and you could have done it where it would have gotten very kind of a little ridiculous. The great thing with Jared and Ann is they just, and all the actors, they and John and Glenn were encouraged us. They did a lot of improv to find the characters, so it could have gone a lot of different ways. And one thing I kind of talked to them about, because I would be editing and sending them scenes early on while they were shooting, was I think we need to play this as straight as possible. And we need to not try to make a commentary on the characters and not try to impose a kind of, comic tone. I think a lot of the things with the WeWork people, and having read it, and I remember reading the news stories and thinking, this is just funny just because what they're saying is kind of so ridiculous, because their kind of self-belief is so kind of insane. And I thought that, especially early on, it's like, we should not try to gild the lilies, so to speak, and try to paint them one way or another. We should present them as they are and stick to that, because some of what they just did was so kind of, it just is so true to life, but also kind of ridiculous that it would just be funny on its own. So there was a big sense of, we need to stay grounded with the characters. And in that, I think the things that happen will kind of add that tone to it. And I think the other thing too, which was a big conversation we had, was we want to be telling this story from the point of view of the characters. And what I mean when I say that is, it would be very easy, and I think with a lot of true life stories, especially when things didn't turn out well, it's easy in hindsight to go look back and say, wow, these people who and I would say the people who bought into WeWork and the people around Adam, it's easy to make a judgment call on them in the present day. But at the time, when the business started, these people thought this was really exciting. So I think a lot of decisions were made of we've got to make it kind of seem like this is really exciting. And there were music choices and, with the score and other things, to be we're just telling us from the point of view of the characters in the time that they're in. And we're not going to try to make a retroactive judgment, and the idea was, we'll let the audience make that. And I think, you kind of see that payoff. I think what is so kind of fascinating about the series is, it does play with a lot of the score. We did play it more upbeat, and it's kind of, when the business is building, it makes a lot of sense. But we kept that going through the series, and I think you see it particularly in the last couple episodes, where you still have these this kind of score that's kind of very swelling and kind of very upbeat, and yet you're having Rebecca and Adam saying these very absolutely crazy, kind of very narcissistic things. And I know for myself, I just felt God, it kind of makes you be wow, it really takes you in the mind of what these characters, how kind of self-deluded in some ways, and how much self-belief these characters have. And I just thought that was a very interesting tone to keep going through the whole show. And we were able to establish it early on. So I just thought that was a really fun thing to do, which I also haven't seen a lot.
Well, exactly right. Everything you said there is so true. And I'm glad you mentioned Wolf of Wall Street, because I feel like it's a platonic ideal for me of a movie where, and Martin Scorsese, I think obviously he's known for doing this, but he's not going to make a judgment on the characters. And he kind of lets the audience make their own judgments, which is not as in vogue as, I don't know if you know this, the world nowadays is not as, they don't love nuance. So I was really passionate about that with WeCrashed, where it's there is no value. The show is not casting a value judgment on them, which I was very appreciative of. And I think you see that, kind of it is just presenting, like you said, they're outlandish and narcissistic personalities and all these things, and you're just supposed to like, figure out, I think, on your own, like what you think of these characters and their situation and their things. So I really appreciate hearing that was a big thought process in the whole project. Yeah.
It was, yeah. I mean, we had a lot of conversations early on because it was a thing, and I really pushed for it because I was just like, if we do that. The other thing I thought was interesting about that is because I definitely think it came up and there were discussions when you kind of look at the employees who were employed, who I think are kind of the real victims of this whole story. I mean, you can kind of say, oh, woe is whatever for the investors or whatever. But I think the people who invested into that company, as far as the employees who gave their time and sweat and effort and really believed in Adam and Rebecca, really got screwed because obviously they got screwed out of benefits and stuff. And I just thought it would be too easy to say, oh, these are horrible from the beginning. But if you say kind of, no, there was something really exciting about this company and especially for you get into the episodes and they start building companies, you see in episode 2 and 3, and people were attracted to them for a reason. There was kind of a thing, there was something very like, what is this here? I mean, obviously it became a house of cards and the emperor had no clothes and all of that. And you see that as going, but I think it's really kind of too easy to say, oh, everybody should have known. I mean, I think that's what's so interesting. And I think there's a lot of stories like that out there right now, but it's just kind of something I think in the American character in general that I know we'll see things like this, is that the cult of personality, when you get really strong personality, is so strong that I just thought that was kind of a big essence of what was this story was about. So we really talked about that a lot and tried to do that in editing early on to get the sense of like, there's an attraction there and we're not going to make a judgment on it, because I just thought it would be a value judgment on the people who got really burned, who were those employees. And I just did not. I know there were several moments I was like, let's not make this choice or that, because I just thought it was like, that's too easy, and it is like, yeah, it has been interesting too, because I get people sending me Twitter like, I'm finding this weirdly inspirational. I was like, yeah, I mean, I hope that's kind of making you question your own values of watching the movie, because you're thinking that, but that Rebecca and Adam really aren't great. I'm hoping, that was kind of the hope, is that people are like, wow, I feel kind of like taken in, but also kind of knowing when I know what is that? I mean, I remember having that experience when I went and saw the movie Nightcrawler, thinking, wow, like the Lou character, like I kind of agree and like him, but what a despicable person. And I was like, I remember like for a week, I was just like, felt so like, wow, they're all qualities we can be attracted to in people who are horrible people. And yet we know what the ultimate outcome is, and it's so, I think storytelling that is really fun and really challenging to do, and it is hard because it's like, especially in TV, it's very hard to actually pull that off and do. And people kind of, don't always want to commit to it. But the great thing with Apple and with our showrunners and with Glenn and John, they were like 100% on board. So it was really, really a blessing.
You mentioned Nightcrawler in there as well. Another movie with incredible central performance from Jake Gyllenhaal. Like, I think it's one of his all-time best. This, you have two amazing actors doing incredible work. And I think, again, just speaking to what you're talking about, like their performances are really what is making, the audience. I think they're very, like, Jared is so enticing as Adam. And I think he gets like the cult leader aspect of Adam Neumann incredibly well. And then you have Anne playing Rebecca. And I think there's a world, certainly I'm sure you could have all done, where it's like, she's just getting dunked on and it's a total punchline the whole time. And then Anne is incredibly funny. And like you said, she is saying some outlandish things, but the show never resorts to that. And I think you really have sympathy or some kind of empathy for her in the end, right? Or a little bit, at least. Like, it does treat her like a human being. And I find that so fascinating. And I guess, can you talk a little about both of those performances and how you guys like worked with that raw material, as it were, or whatever you want to call it, like of their work? Because it's so
yeah, I mean, I knew coming in, as part of what attracted me to the project was, I mean, I love cutting like great actors. I mean, that's part of the fun. I mean, I've cut Rami Malek, I've Julia Roberts, I've just cut a ton of amazing people. And so when you kind of get into projects where you're going to have really great actors, it's like you get really excited. And the great thing with the great thing with John and Glenn, and then the great thing, with Jared and Anne was like, especially early on, they kind of shot this more like you would have featured. There was a lot of exploration of characters, a lot of different takes in the first, like, I would say the first 3 or 4 episodes. They just did a lot to kind of really explore who the characters were, which, they don't always feel like there's not always much time to do in TV, but this, they were really like, no, we're going to treat it like that. So early on, there was a lot of footage, and like Jared would, could do a 10 line readings, there'd be 10 different reads there. So there's a lot of great material. That's what I said earlier on. We had to kind of pick what the point of view is and not, because they sometimes would go be like, okay, do you want to make this bigger or not? And I think part of that was because having, if you watch any footage of like Adam Neumann himself is kind of like this force of nature and is a very big personality. So I think to find that, like, there was a lot of exploration, and so there was all this great stuff. And the same thing with Anne, even though it's like, I think it's there's such an interesting contrast with you because, Jared, like the Adam character that Jared's playing is so kind of big and whatever. And then, but I think Anne has this very strong and kind of amazing, at times silent, but not, because she's very like that character is very wanting that Adam has. And so both of them just gave such great things. I mean, and I think Anne's character was just, I think she's one of the great actresses of like her generation, if not the greatest. I think I was blown away. I think one scene in particular that I kind of always, I remember cutting early on was the proposal scene, at the end of episode 1. And, it's not very cutty, which which I love not having to do. I love to not have to cut when you have such great performances. But she goes in and she's talking about this yoga studio that she had wanted to be a part of and wasn't. And at times it's like she's telling the story and it's kind of easy to laugh because you're like, oh, the woes of like of an upper class, like, privileged white woman. But the truth is like, it is kind of, it's funny, it's tragic, because there are real emotions behind that character. And I was like kind of blown away by what she's able to do, because she's able to play all these different facets of the character. And I feel like I kind of really remember watching the scene, like for a second, you kind of want to laugh at her and then you want to start to cry, because you see like, this is someone who really has a long and a need. And I think that's part of what was probably, or at least I think in the show, what we portray is like, part of the toxic element of their relationship is she really had this need and this desire to be, kind of famous in some sort of a way, and wanting that. And I think, the Adam character naturally has that, but I think her need or whatever is kind of what adds to this very toxic element that kind of like has a lot of ramifications in the company. And she plays that so amazingly. I don't know. I cannot say enough about either of them. They're both kind of, it was just incredible to get to cut them. And I also think most of the rest of the cast, because I think another major actor in the thing is Kyle Marvin, who's like the kind of playing the Miguel kind of character, who's a very, I think central as well and silent. I just think the whole cast, like even in the small parts, they just cast this show so well, and everyone was so great, and so it was just a real pleasure to cut everyone.
Yeah, it is incredible. They're so good. I'm glad you mentioned Kyle Marvin too. I think he has a scene at the very end of the series when he's like, you frustrate me so much to add, like he's just so frustrated, but he also still really likes him. And I just found that again, like, so I don't know, unexpected. You've seen like, again, like the story here obviously is a real life story, but even in general, you've seen in movies where like the two people, like, like think of like Social Network or whatever, or like Eduardo and Mark are going to have their big falling out. And like, you could see that here in a different, like, obviously it didn't happen in real life, but like you could have seen that anyway here. And it's interesting beats. And I think that's what I really liked about it. It's like, it just does not go where you expect, I guess.
Yeah. I find it kind of really fascinating, the kind of dynamic that happens. Cause I think even if there's a documentary that's on Hulu about them, and you see the interview with like these people, and I think there is kind of a cult-like aspect where it's like, they really are battered and damaged from the thing they went through, and how like they really believed in people and hadn't been let out, but they still kind of want it. They're still kind of a wanting to like be like, maybe for approval or to be a part of this thing. I think that's a part of it. I think we lean into a little bit more, because it is kind of, that is a thing of like, you definitely get like very, with anybody with huge personalities, that you're kind of very attracted to the, and I think it happens in the entertainment industry, happens in a lot of like, happens, in so many different aspects of like life. It's like you get attracted to people and maybe they don't fulfill what you thought in them, but you still have this need and desire to like have approval and maybe be a part of it. It's just such a human and basic kind of need we all have, that I think it's part of what is kind of very tragic about this story, and also kind of what Adam and Rebecca took advantage of, like for their own kind of gain. But it is, to me, that was like, it was such a human part of like this story that I think makes it very, it's very like tough to like turn away and kind of not watch.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned before like how like the performances, at least in those first couple episodes, it was not maybe like, more like a movie setting where you're getting a lot of different takes and stuff like that. And the whole show, honestly, like, I mean, I've seen obviously like a lot of limited series this year that feel like shows that maybe would have been movies like 10 years ago or whatever, right? Like that are now limited series, and they feel like they're padding the initial stages. I'm not going to besmirch any of these shows by name or whatever, but it feels like sometimes like the first few episodes are like the 20 minutes of a first act that have been stretched out. This show, I felt like immediately the pacing is dead on. It's so engaging. You kind of like really come out of the box like on fire, and it like really is just well thought out. I don't know. I guess, can you talk a little about like, that kind of setup and avoiding the kind of like maybe slow rollout of those first few episodes to get people invested? I don't know how much you were able to think about that, or maybe that was just all in the writing or whatever, but I would love to hear you talk about that, because I think
it was a bit of
stuff is really good. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. Yeah, it was a bit of both. I mean, it was definitely thought out, because the first cut of the premiere, I think, was like 80 something minutes, and we're traversing a lot of time. I mean, obviously it starts like in kind of, 2019, and we go back 13-ish years. I think it's 12, 13 years. And then you're kind of like, and the whole series just covers a lot of time. So I think part of that, to keep people engaged, is we have to keep it moving. There has to be a lot of forward movement in the show. And also I definitely felt this, and it's something I would talk about. It was like, with streaming, especially now with so many options, I think you have to keep people hooked. So it's like, I just felt like the show has to feel fun in a way out of the gate. Like, you have to feel kind of excited about it, and kind of get people in, and then pick your moments to kind of like slow down, and I definitely think the opening had that. I definitely think, but right after the opening, after that kind of 2019, that we like cut back right in time, there were all the scenes of Adam selling. I mean, this is an example of like, within that, those were actually multiple different scenes. They weren't intercut. They were just like that. And it kind of just all the momentum stopped in the episode, And so we quickly said, okay, wait, like, it's kind of too much, like, but we need to keep the episode moving. And there are moments we need to stop and slow down, but this isn't it. So we kind of intercut them and added music to kind of like, to kind of just add this kind of forward movement, and realize, okay, he's been doing this. He's been, schlepping a lot around trying to like sell this thing. And really, like, I think you have to pick your moments. And I think that Baruch presentation is really the moment you're like, okay, here's where we're really going to take a moment to get to know the characters, But then we're very quickly, picking the pace back up, as it gets to know Miguel and stuff, and it gets, so it's kind of, there was a big push and pull of like, we need to keep things moving forward, like, a lot, because otherwise I just think, we have a lot of ground to cover, and B, I think people turn off. I mean, I know I do at times, like, with stuff. So it's like, and I just felt there was a certain lightness to the story early on that, like, we'll get to the heavier parts in the later episodes, but we need to keep it a brisk pace early on. Yeah. that we all talked about.
And then you keep the base. I mean, like, I wanted to ask you to mention about the employees and stuff. We get to the penultimate episode. It ends. We know it's going to happen. Obviously, if you know the WeCrashed story or just in general, it's not like a spoiler or anything. But like, so that the workers are going to get the rug pulled out from under them, and you guys, the tension built up in that like penultimate episode, especially with regard. I forget the actress and the character's name. I apologize, but she's trying to buy one of her a $20,000 bag.
Chloe, yeah, I'm forgetting the actress name, but yeah.
And then you end on her clicking. It's just like, I would watch it. It's like, oh my god, like like this, like, could not believe it, and it's such a great. It's like not a cliffhanger you would expect going into the finale, but I was just like, what a great cliffhanger, and the way that is paced is just so good. And I guess, can you talk about like how you kind of like thought of the last part of that, penultimate episode, and like pulling out and making sure it was like just calculated so perfectly?
Yeah, I mean, part of that was, we kind of, some of that was scripted and some of it was kind of played around with just the placement of things at the end, because obviously you're kind of cutting through, like, you have, the reporter who, like I was writing the blog about the S1, and then you have the Wall Street Journal, and then you have Miguel, and you have Chloe, and you have all the, you have like other employees. So it was kind of, we played a little bit with the placement, and I think a thing that really helped us was that song that was the New York song from St. Vincent, which I should say was a Kyle Marvin suggestion. He actually played it on set to get some emotion. And I just remember hearing it, and I was like, I called the director Tinge, and I was like, oh, did you want this? She's like, oh, Kyle was just playing that to like help him react to stuff. And I was like, this is great. It's like a New York song, and it's like, it really kind of, the whole thing is like, it just remirrors that. And so it kind of, finding this, you always, when you find a great song like that for a sequence like that, you kind of have some of your work done for you. but it gives a great moment to the end because there's a lot of stuff going on. It feels very fast. But when we get to Chloe, I was like, we just have to slow it down for a second. You have to like make that, because a character like that, you know, it is like a big thing. Like $20,000 when you're a kid and you don't have any money, you think you're gonna, like, that's a big decision. And so let's just sit with her for a second and just see it with her eyes, you know, and just really let her make that decision. And yeah, it probably isn't a typical cliffhanger, but it feels kind of, to me, I just kind of watching, I was like, I feel kind of this emotion, and I felt something, which if you're the one editing, you feel, I was like, that's always good, you know, like I always kind of try to aim for that, you know?
Yeah.
And it was kind of this thing of like, I just remember watching, being like, she has no idea what she's in for, and she's bought into this thing, and it's kind of, it just felt really tragic, but you know, and also kind of like, I don't know, it's sad because it's like you know, you have no idea what's happening in the next like month of once this S1 goes out, and it's kind of, yeah, I just kind of love that moment. So I'm glad you liked it.
No, I loved it so much, and I just, like I said, I think the show is remarkable. All the episodes are streaming now on Apple TV Plus. Justin Krohn, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.